Hey, this is Joel with American Giants. I wanted to do this episode on something I really think is cool, and that is the mannequin version. That's what we call it. Few people know about these guys, but they have a direct link to Bob Puit, International Fiberglass, and Muffler Man. In the early days of Puit Fiberglass, there was like this experimental phase going on, and Bob was discovering all these things. You know, he started out with this fiberglass horse trailer, and he had like a paper mache horse in there to, advertise how a horse would look in the trailer. And then somebody was like, well, you need to get somebody to make you a realistic looking fiberglass horse in there. I mean, that first horse really took off, and pretty soon he was making horses, cows, longhorn steers, buffalo, chickens, zebras, all kinds of animals, anything he thought that a business could use, whether it was a restaurant, whether it was an amusement park, and Western wear clothing stores were actually very popular with Bob. It's somebody he targeted because it worked really well with what they were trying to sell. So this is all happening very early 60s, 1961, 1962. By 1963, Bob is really expanding. He's got quite a bit of molds building up at this point in time, and this is where we see a shift into giants. Bob wanted something bigger, a real attention getter for your business, and this is where you see a shift in Puit Fiberglass going into giant men instead of just animals. Their first giant men was the 14-foot Paul Bunyan version. We have evidence that this was on Puit Fiberglass lot, so we know that they probably made the first one of these. I don't know the exact date, but it was among the early giants that were made. You also have a very early version of the Bunyan, not the typical Muffler Man we know today, but something that looks similar to it. We only believe one of these were made. And then, of course, you have these mannequin versions, which is what I want to focus on today. And then after that, you finally have the 20-foot tall Paul Bunyan Muffler Man that just morphed into hundreds of different Muffler Man giants and versions being made and scattered all across America. So the mannequin versions, best I can tell, were probably conceived and built in late 1962 or early 1963. We know that by the summer of 1963, they were making the first Paul Bunyan, and in a lot of the early pictures of this Bunyan Muffler Man, you can see the mannequin versions in the background. So I believe the mannequin versions actually predated the Muffler Men. The idea behind the mannequin versions was just sheer size. These guys were probably over 23 feet tall, especially like the chef version here behind me, even taller with that hat, right? And the idea was that these guys would wear actual clothes. This is before Muffler Men, so they weren't, doing all the fiberglass design and the wrinkles in the clothes and all that like they did on the Muffler Men. He actually wore clothes. And we believe that the guy who sculpted this was probably Bill Swan, the same man that went on to sculpt the Muffler Men. But the facial features and the hands, it's all kind of characteristic of his work. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Bill Swan was the guy who sculpted these mannequin versions. Interestingly, his wife Jane was the seamstress who made the massive clothing outfits that these giants wore. Records only show that 3 of these guys were made. Now, there could have been more, but to my knowledge, there was only 3 made, and they were a cowboy version, what looks to be like a standard or a Bunyan version, and then you have this chef version here. The cowboy version was ordered by the Barbecue Ranch Western Wear in Post Falls, Coeur d'Alene area in Idaho. They also ordered a bunch of cows, horses, the bucking bronco with a rider, a bear, and photographic evidence even shows that Bob Puit was probably likely on site when these were all installed. The chef actually was also well known because it was heavily used in Puit and International Fiberglass advertising. Now what's interesting is that we know that shortly after the Muffler Men were made, Puit sold a lot of the molds to International Fiberglass, and International Fiberglass actively advertised these mannequin versions. To my knowledge, they never made one, but they had the molds, they had the capability of doing it. But these mannequin versions were all most likely, and according to photographic evidence, they were all made by Puit Fiberglass. I am still trying to piece together the history of this chef statue. We have a few photographs of when he was actually set up. We believe it was probably in the early to mid 60s. And he stood at this location about 10 years. And the location, the best I can tell, was called Jennings. I don't know exactly where this was. I think it was in the Los Angeles area, Southern California for sure. I have yet to pinpoint an address on the map of where this guy stood. But we do have a number of photographs that show us there, and they also ordered a bunch of cows from Bob that went on the roof. So they were definitely selling hamburgers and steaks. That third mannequin, the standard Bunyan version, no idea. I only know it exists because of one picture, and I have no idea where it went. It doesn't show up in any other advertising, any other photographs that I've ever seen. So we really have no idea what happened to that guy. Now, here's where the story gets interesting. A few years later, International Fiberglass is making all those Paul Bunyans, probably around 1965, 1966, and a place in Albuquerque, Schaffner Lumber Company, orders a Bunyan, right? They put him up on their big sign, and he's a fixture in town. He shows up in a few photographs of the era, and then in the early 1970s, the place burns down, and the giant along with it, totally destroyed. There is somehow a connection between the modern-day May Cafe in Albuquerque, which we all know has a lumberjack, and that property for Schaffner. I'm not sure if it was on the same property. There was a connection with early business owners, right? And so they wanted to get a Bunyan back to replace the one that burned. And interestingly, they didn't go to International Fiberglass. It was likely too late at this point in time. And so they start hunting for a lumberjack, and lo and behold, they find one in Southern California that's a chef. Okay, well, that's this guy right here. It all lines up, and around somewhere between probably 1973, 74, maybe 1975, they get this guy, take him down, and bring him to Albuquerque. And that's where he's locally transformed in Albuquerque into a lumberjack to replace an original 20-foot Paul Bunyan Muffler Man. All right, so, and I didn't know this for many, many years, finally figured it out. But that Bunyan that still stands at the now closed May Cafe in Albuquerque is actually this chef mannequin. The one in Post Falls, he goes on and becomes Cowboy Wayne. That was his name. That's how locals knew him. Very popular in the area. He originally wore jeans in 1995. Somebody did a prank on him and cut his jeans into shorts. The community was really upset, so they replaced him with leather chaps. There's stories about the federal agents who stormed Ruby Ridge shopping at this Western wear store where Cowboy Wayne stood, and trying to blend in with the locals. And of course, they were spotted by the locals instantly, and everybody knew they were in town. So there's some connection there to history with Cowboy Wayne. In 2004, he was sold, moved to Airdrie, Alberta, and still stands there today. In 2023, I actually visited him and got some great photographs and video of one of these amazingly rare Puit fiberglass mannequin versions, and it was great to see one of them up close. They've replaced the clothes a few times. Obviously, you have a giant that was built in the early 60s. The original clothes are going to be long gone and faded and tattered by this point in time. So these mannequin versions needed updated clothes throughout the years. So it's amazing that we actually today still have 2 of the 3 mannequin versions still with us, one in Albuquerque, disguised as a lumberjack, and the other one in Alberta that you can still visit today.